Good morning. My name is Demetrius Booth, and today we will discuss effective leadership of virtual teams. There are many facets that can comprise what leaders can do to ensure that their virtual teams are successful. Some of these things can be considered designing your virtual organization, levels of listening to ensure everyone is heard and feels seen, forging resilient teams, virtual challenges that exist, being emotionally connected, and having these infinitely connected conversations all lend towards being an effective team as leaders so that we don't overwhelm the system and we begin to work through this step by step. We will do this in two parts. The first part will focus in on emotional connectedness, levels of listening, and forging resilient teams. For emotional connectedness, we will consider definitions of being emotionally intelligent, and we will talk through some of the primary ingredients of being self aware, having emotional management, leading into emotional connectedness. Then we'll shift over to levels of listening and we'll explore how we download information, at what point we begin to look for facts and what is being communicated, what is required to connect with someone empathetically, and then what generative listening looks like. And then lastly, we will discuss what is designed to help a team become resilient. As we forge resilient teams, especially in a virtual environment, it is going to be important as a leader to analyze the team climate, to ensure that everyone is treated with respect and that trust is earned along the way. As you can see, when we began to explore the effects of effective leadership of virtual teams, that from that center space, that we have multiple prongs that reach out, connecting all of these elements together under one umbrella. That as we forge resilient teams, it's important that we have this infinitely connected conversation, that in the process of communicating meaning, that we have to have and understand the levels of listenings, never forgetting that there will be challenges that exist in our virtual organization, and so emotional connectedness is important. And all of it comes back to how we design virtual organizations. For a moment, I want you to think along the lines of good and bad, uh, transformational, pseudo transformational leaders that you've had in the past. There are three dimensions that I want you to think along. IQ, that just simply deals with cognitive space, how intelligent someone is. Tech, which is technical ability, how well someone does their job, and then emotional connectedness. That is our ability to connect emotionally and authentically and genuinely with someone. As we think about these dimensions, I want you to think about them along a parallel of being good or bad, or transformational or pseudo transformational. There is a word that you would use to define a good leader and a bad leader that you have had in the past. I want you to do a mental model and think about that word that you would use to define the good and the bad leader. Now that you've done that, what I would like for you to do is mentally picture where you would place your word. That when you consider the good leader or the bad leader, would you place your word of their effectiveness, of how they treated people, how well they did the job? Would you place your word in IQ, technical ability, or emotional intelligence, or in this instance, emotional connectedness? Where do you believe your word should fall? Oftentimes, people will place their word inside of emotional intelligence or emotional connectedness. If you were asked how you would define emotional intelligence, what would be your definition? Emotional intelligence could easily equate to the ability to recognize and understand and manage our own emotions while simultaneously recognizing and understanding and, more importantly, connecting with the emotions of others. There is an image that you see on the screen. According to Bacon and Core, there are many subcategories when it comes to being emotionally connected. They broke them out into 4: well-being, self-control, emotionality, and sociability. They also considered it along 2 dimensions. That emotional intelligence can be looked at through the lens of operationalized or emotional intelligence ability. When we consider operationalized, this is the emotional perception that a person has based on self-report. This can often happen through a conversation or a assessment where it is only that person doing it. Also, that it can be considered along the EI ability. This is done through the same way as performing a IQ test where it talks about the ability. And so we have self-awareness as a base, and we would be out of harmony or lack balance if we did not have emotional management, emotional connection, and then all of that leads into our own personal leadership style. If we look at the dimensions to ask ourselves questions, does emotional connectedness exist? I would argue that the answer is yes. Well, if it exists, then we should be able to formulate some ingredients. According to Bacon and Core, there are multiple dimensions to this. We can look at it through the lens of being operationalized or ability, that we can break it out into subcategories of well-being, self-control, emotionality, and sociability. I offered 3 primary ingredients of self-awareness, emotional management, and emotional connectedness. You formulated 2 words as you considered and thought back and reflected on a good or a bad leader that you have had in the past. And so if it exists, and I believe that it does, then there should be some ingredients that make it. Thirdly, we should be able to define it. And if it exists and there are ingredients that make it and we can define it, well, then it has to live somewhere. Emotional connectedness lives in the brain, primarily in the limbic region. The amygdala is a primary piece of the wiring that connects emotional connectedness. The amygdala is the center that prompts our fight, flight, or freeze. Most times it has this negative bias because it is designed to keep you alive, but it also has a part that looks for belonging cues. It does not differentiate physical or perceived psychological or social emotional threats, and it operates 100 times faster than our neocortex. The word amygdala happens to be Greek for almond. When your amygdala fires, it floods your brain with cortisol. Your body goes on high alert, and there is this decrease in complex thought and the ability to move with objectiveness and reasonableness. And there is this default to self preservation. It is at this moment that, according to Hoth and Amin, that these positive emotions can lead to outcomes in the same way as negative. Again, working along a dichotomy, oftentimes we consider the behavior that takes place in a workplace under the auspice of organizational citizenship behavior or deviant work behavior. When we look at organizational citizenship behavior and deviant work behavior, it comes back to a few subcategories: employee characteristics, leadership behavior, task characteristics, group characteristics, organizational characteristics, and human resource management. When emotional labor, according to Hoth and Amin, takes place, it requires an employee to present organizational citizenship behaviors even when they are going through an arduous journey in the organization, when they may not feel like it, when they are upset or angry or have been emotionally hijacked, or their leaders have not been emotionally intelligent. Along those lines, the employee itself, as this emotional labor is being paid, begins to fight to take something back. That there are also some subcategories for how a person perceives value in the organization: a level of autonomy, inclusion, competency, respect, safety, and value. Along those dimensions, whenever we get ready to pay this emotional toll, there are some things that we can do to prepare ourselves. What are we fighting for in the moment when we become emotionally hijacked? Understanding what happens to us physiologically when those moments happen and what we believe is being taken away from us, and then how it affects our actions, our decisions, and our behaviors. As we shift from the point of considering what it required to be emotionally connected in our organization, the next layer down is how we listen. Our world is shaped through the domains of culture. Based on the domains of culture, family, religion, politics, economics, technology, learning, health, history, time, space, our world and our perceptions are shaped. Oftentimes, we view the world and we pull information in smack dab in the center of those domains of culture from the center of our own world. Level one of listening is downloading. That is when we are pulling information in. And the downside to this level of listening, while we are pulling it in and we are receiving information, oftentimes it is done through and solely through the domains of culture from the center of our own world. Level 2 of listening, when we are connecting with others, is factual listening. This is when we move to the window of our own world to see what is different, the things that have happened that are different than what we have expected. Level 3 of listening is empathetic listening. It requires us to leave our own world and our own domains of culture and what we believe to be true to meet someone where they are. And then lastly, the fourth level of listening is generative listening. This is when we can see our fellow co-workers at their greatest selves. The starting point being emotional connectedness. When we are connected emotionally, it lends itself to us being able to hit these places of empathetic and generative listening. Instead of looking at the level of listening as a linear process, we should look at it as cyclical. That there are moments for us to download information. There are times to empathetic listening to meet people where they are. There are moments where we should be looking for facts, and all the while still with generative listening, seeing that person in the best sense of themselves. Cultural shifts can happen in your organization by just 1 degree. That if we are using organizational citizenship behavior, we can always ensure that we are on mark and on target and on time. By the same, deviant work behaviors can also shift us from this place of where we need to be with our organizational deviant work behaviors. If an aircraft took off from JFK in New York, flying to California, by being off by 1 degree over that course of the flight, every degree that the pilot is off takes them 40 miles off course. In the same way, being off by 1 degree will lead your organization off course. We could have all of the best intentions, but if we aren't focused and if we aren't centered on organizational citizenship behavior, instead of landing at LAX, we could potentially land in the Pacific Ocean. 1 degree off course. When we consider culture in our organization, we have to look at it through a few lenses: artifacts, espoused values, and underlying assumptions and beliefs. Artifacts are beacons that point us towards the important things that we see, hear, and feel. Our espoused values are adopted philosophies, goals, and the way of life. And underlying assumptions and beliefs is this repeated belief and value. By just 1 degree, when we consider the pattern that exists inside of an organization that typically leads us off course or keeps us on course, there is you, the leader. You have in the decision that is made. Hopefully there is some use of emotional connectedness to it. And then you express this decision. People begin doing it. It becomes a habit. And before long, it is embedded as a part of the culture. To ensure that we create a positive culture to build resilient teams, there are a few tasks that a leader must do. The first task is to analyze the team climate. Most organizations do a sort of survey to understand how people feel connected about the organization, how they feel about the work that they are doing, and how they would gauge the leaders in their organization. This data could be used to analyze the climate that exists. From there, a leader must begin to do the work in a virtual organization to earn trust. What that looks like across multiple enterprises can be very different, but that is still a task that must be done. And then lastly, treating people with respect and ensuring that everyone else is treating each other with respect. Again, this flows back into citizenship behavior. Today, we moved through three of the elements that are required to have effective leadership in virtual organizations. We talked through emotional connectedness and how it can be defined in three of the primary ingredients that exist based on the work of Bacon and Core, that it can be operationalized, which is self-reported, or you can look at it through the lens of EI ability, which is the same as doing a IQ test, that there are four dimensions: well-being, self-control, emotionality, and sociability. The levels of listening allow members of an organization to pull in information, to look for facts, to understand one another and see each other at their best versions of themselves. And then as we begin to forge resilient teams, it is important to analyze the team climate, treat people with respect, and do the work to earn trust. If we are off by just 1 degree, it can equate to negative outcomes and deviant work behaviors in our organization. And sometimes it is easier for these things to exist in a virtual capacity. But when we are on course, it lends itself to organizational citizenship behavior.